In this series, we will be reading the lore text about the world of Azeroth from the book World of Warcraft Chronicle, Volume 1. This episode covers the second half of the second chapter, Primordial Azeroth, Odin and the Raising of the Halls of Valor. As the other keepers were conducting their ceremony to empower the dragon aspects, Odin brooded within the halls of Ulduar. He was furious that his allies had acted against his wishes, the wishes of the Prime Designate. More than that, Odin believed with all his heart that the dragon aspects would fail in their charge to safeguard the world. For the good of Azeroth, Odin decided to take matters into his own hands. He would create an elite army of his design, one that he could call on to protect the world should the need ever arise. To fill the ranks of this fighting force, Odin would look to the mighty Vrykul. He had always admired their innate courage and strength. He saw the Vrykul, above all other Titan forged, as the perfect expression of the warrior spirit. Upon returning to Ulduar, Tyr and the other keepers demanded that Odin abandon his foolish plans. Yet their words had no effect on the Prime Designate. Odin was single-minded in his focus and unbending in his ideas of what was right. He invited the other keepers to help him create his army. When none stepped forward to join his cause, Odin announced he would pursue his quest without them. Odin secured one of Ulduar's wings to act as the base for his new army. To permanently separate it from the rest of the fortress and from the other keepers, he called on the Titan-forged sorceress Helia. Over the ages, Odin had come to see her as his adopted daughter. Helia wove a great spell to encase the keeper's stronghold. Then, focusing all of her power, she ripped the colossal chunk of Ulduar from the earth and lifted it into the cloudy skies. In time, this floating citadel would become known as the Halls of Valor. From atop his fortress, Odin bellowed out a proclamation to all Vrykul. Those who proved their bravery by dying glorious deaths in battle would live again in the Halls of Valor. Their spirits would be transported to the fortress and given mighty new storm-forged bodies. These champions, these Valoryar, would serve as Azeroth's foremost guardians. Their deeds would live on in the hearts of all Titan forged forever after. All that remained was to find a means of ferrying the spirits of the dead to the Halls of Valor. For this, Odin studied the energies that permeated the Shadowlands. The knowledge he gained would allow him to transform some Vrykul into spectral beings known as the Valkyr. These wraith-like servants would travel between the Shadowlands and the physical world, guiding the souls of worthy Vrykul to the Halls of Valor. Yet, those who became Valkyr would be cursed to live as phantom beings for all eternity. No Vrykul volunteered for the grim task of becoming a Valkyr, and thus Odin decided he would create his servants by force. Helia admonished the keeper for his willingness to turn the Titan forged into slaves against their will. The argument between her and Odin grew so heated that the two nearly came to blows. In the end, Helia warned that she would return the Halls of Valor to Ulduar if Odin did not change his mind. Odin saw Helia's disobedience as a threat not only to his plans, but to the future safety of Azeroth itself. Blinded by his dreams of what the halls of valor could become, he struck out at the sorceress. Odin shattered her physical form and twisted her spirit into the first of the Valkyr. Helia's howls of pain and anger rumbled across the surface of Azeroth and pierced into the very heart of the Shadowlands. This violent transformation would forever darken Helia, but her torment was not finished. Though she loathed Odin for what he had done to her, she found herself compelled to obey his will. Under Odin's command, she set out to transform unwilling Vrykul into the cursed Valkyr. For ages, Helia and her fellow Valkyr brought the souls of heroic Vrykul to the halls of valor. The citadel became filled with storm-infused Valyar. Odin trained and empowered each of these warriors. He had no remorse for breaking from the Keepers, or for transforming Helia into the first Valkyr. In Odin's mind, everything he had done was for the safety of Azeroth and in honor of the great pantheon. Sargeras and the betrayal, the Keepers went about their duties on Azeroth, unaware of a new threat that was taking shape in the distant reaches of the Great Dark. Sargeras, having broken all ties with the Pantheon, meditated on the fate of the universe in isolation. His fear that the Void Lords had already corrupted otherworld souls consumed him. As doubt and despair continued twisting the Titan's every thought, he became more certain than ever that creation itself was fatally flawed. Finally, he concluded that the only way to spare the universe was to purge it in fire. Thus, his grand burning crusade would begin. To accomplish this burning crusade, Sargeras required a vast force of unquenchable rage. He knew of only one place that held such power and potential: Mardom, the plane of banishment. Over the ages, the prison had become bloated with fell magic and vengeful demons. Their presence had warped Mardom, transforming it into a realm of nightmare. Torrents of fell energy ceaselessly bombarded the prison's walls, bathing the captive demons in a roiling sea of volatile magic. Sargeras quelled his remaining apprehension and tore the prison asunder, spilling its wrathful denizens into the great dark beyond. The subsequent explosion of fell magic was powerful beyond even what the fallen Titan had imagined. Violent energies enveloped Sargeras, surging through his veins and searing his very soul. His eyes burst in gouts of emerald fire. Fell volcanoes ignited across his once noble form, splitting his skin apart and revealing an endless furnace of blistering hate. Yet despite these horrific physical changes, Sargeras's mind remained locked on his one all-consuming purpose: to prevent the Void Lords from possessing creation. Life itself had to be extinguished. In shattering the prison, Sargeras had ruptured the boundary between the Great Dark and the twisting Nether. A monstrous celestial maw, limbed in a storm of emerald fire, had ripped through the fabric of reality. It would remain a scar on creation, smoldering proof of Sargeras's madness for all eternity. Demons of every shape and size poured into the physical universe from this rift, howling in triumph at their release. Sargeras imbued the ravenous masses with his power, uniting them as one in an inferno of fell magic. Though many demons had previously tapped into the volatile energies of the Nether, none had ever experienced the pure might and rage found in Sargeras's fell. Some of the creatures grew in size and stature. Still others felt new cunning and intelligence unfold in their minds. By this point, Sargeras had learned more about the nature of demons, including how to permanently destroy their spirits. He offered a simple pact in exchange for the demon's newfound power: fight at his command or be extinguished. It was not a difficult choice. To thwart the Void Lords, Sargeras unleashed his new army, his Burning Legion, upon the innumerable worlds of the Great Dark. Never before had the forces of evil been united in such numbers. Sargeras wielded enough power to make disobedience all but unthinkable. None would dream of challenging him, but more importantly, his minions grew to delight in their role as agents of extinction. The Burning Legion fell upon its first world. Though it did not contain a slumbering titan, it was a world that had been ordered by the Pantheon in ages past. Sargeras's forces incinerated the mortal civilizations that dwelled there, wiping out dozens of sentient species. When the Constellar whom the Pantheon had charged to oversee the world arrived, Sargeras himself annihilated the celestial being. Agramar was the first to learn of the Constellar's demise. As more news of the Burning Legion's atrocities reached him, he hunted down the demonic army. Agramar arrived just in time to witness the Legion's scouring yet another world, and he saw the twisted, fire-wreathed being leading it. His mentor and greatest friend, Sargeras. Agramar was stunned. He demanded an explanation from Sargeras. The former champion offered none, only declaring that his burning crusade was the sole means to purify the universe. Anyone who stood against him, Sargeras added, would burn in the fires of his legion as well. Knowing that he could not sway Sargeras with words, Agramar challenged his former mentor to single combat. Before the watching eyes of the demon masses, the two greatest warriors the universe had ever known came to blows. Agramar soon found himself outmatched. Like all titans, he was uniquely susceptible to fell magic. Sargeras's ferocious assaults shattered Agramar's defenses and sent him reeling in agony. In a final desperate counterattack, Agramar summoned all the power at his command and struck at Sargeras. Their two blades met, igniting a furious explosion of fell and arcane power. When the torrent of warring energies finally subsided, Sargeras and Agramar saw that both of their weapons had been shattered. Heavily wounded by the blast, Agramar retreated from the battle and returned to the rest of the Pantheon. Disbelief gripped the other titans as they learned what had happened. The thought of their most trusted and noble warrior falling to darkness shook their faith to the core. The Pantheon could not fathom how to stop such a threat, Yet they agreed they could not sit idly by. Girded for war, the combined might of the Pantheon confronted Sargeras and his unholy legion near a world named Nialam. Amenthul called out to Sargeras, pleading with him to abandon his mad, burning crusade. He told Sargeras of Azeroth, a fledgling world soul with more potential than any of the Pantheon had ever seen, a being strong enough to defeat the Void Lords in due time. Sargeras listened carefully, but was unmoved. Despite his earlier battle with Sargeras, Agramar believed that something noble still lingered deep in the former champion's heart. As a last resort, he laid down his arms and approached the fallen Titan. Agramar recounted tales of their glorious battles against demons, reminding Sargeras of the sacred oaths they had sworn to protect creation. But Sargeras was set in his ways. Nothing the Pantheon could say, nothing even his cherished protege could say, would ever change his mind. With a howl of rage and sorrow, Sargeras struck Agramar down. His ruined fell blade nearly cleaving the Titan in two. Infuriated by this unthinkable murder, the Pantheon launched an all-out assault on Sargeras and his burning legion. Stars withered and died as the battle raged across the cosmos, scarring vast stretches of reality. Nialam, known thereafter as the Doom World, became warped and twisted by the apocalyptic conflict. The Titans of the Pantheon wielded powers incomprehensible to mortal minds, yet even they could not overcome Sargeras's fel-fueled might. The fallen Titan decimated the Pantheon members with fell fire until he had broken their will to fight. To seal their demise, Sargeras summoned a massive fell storm that would consume their bodies and souls alike. Yet just as the furious onslaught of energy washed over the defeated Titans, Norgannon made one last attempt to stave off oblivion. Norgannon bent the raw energies of the universe to his will, weaving a protective shroud around each of the Pantheon Titan's spirits and launching them into the great dark. While the Titans' disembodied souls hurtled through the cosmos, Sargeras's fell storm obliterated what remained of their physical forms. Unaware that the Titans' spirits had survived, Sargeras declared the burning legion victorious. The Pantheon was no more, and he now had tantalizing clues about a powerful world soul called Azeroth. Yet, though Sargeras had learned the name of this nascent Titan, its whereabouts remained a mystery. Nonetheless, without the Pantheon to oppose him, he knew he would find the world soul in time, and he knew he would have to do so before the Void Lords did. The Burning Crusade. The Burning Legion had triumphed over the Pantheon, and Sargeras moved to rally even more demons to his cause. Yet, the fight with the Pantheon had exposed a flaw in his seemingly unstoppable army, one that he was determined to remedy. For all of Sargeras's vast power and intellect, he could not direct his entire army at once. Demons were vicious and bloodthirsty, but most lacked strategic thinking. Much of the Legion had fallen needlessly to the Pantheon. Sargeras wanted cunning and tactically minded commanders to join his side, and he had seen a place from which to harvest such servants, a world called Argus. Argus was home to the highly advanced Eridar, a race far more intelligent than any other Sargeras had encountered. The Eridar hungered for knowledge above all else. By attaining it, they believed they could shape the universe into a better and more benevolent place. A triumvirate of leaders ruled over the Eridar, not by might or fear, but by contemplating the great questions of the cosmos and sharing the answers with their people. The mighty Archimond had a gift for finding the strengths in those around him. His bold demeanor inspired his followers, filling them with the confidence and the courage to face any challenge. Kil'jaeden, the most brilliant of the rulers, was considered a prodigy even among the gifted Eridar. Witty and cunning, he reveled in puzzling out the most confounding mysteries of the cosmos. Last, there was Velen, the spiritual heart of the triumvirate. He stood as a relentless champion of peace, whose wisdom could diffuse any conflict. Individually, each member of the triumvirate would have made an excellent leader. But it was together, with each of their strengths working in synergy, that they elevated their people to heights undreamt of. The Eridar's great cohesion was the ideal solution to the Legion's weaknesses. Yet, to conscript them to his cause, Sargeras would have to corrupt them entirely. In the guise of a radiant and elegant being, he communed with the Eridar triumvirate. Sargeras played to their desires, promising them knowledge and unimaginable power. He showed them worlds beyond count over which they might hold dominion, primitive places that the Eridar could transform into sanctuaries of peace and intellectual thought. Sargeras vowed to share with the Eridar not only the most obscure secrets of existence, but also the final answer to what he believed was the fundamental flaw in creation. In return, the denizens of Argus would devote themselves to Sargeras's grand work and help him remedy that flaw. The offer awed both Archimond and Kil'jaeden, who were honored to be part of this grand undertaking. Velen, however, was not convinced. He sensed something strange about the seemingly beautiful and all-knowing creature who had appeared to them. Velen meditated using an ancient artifact gifted to his race by the holy Naru long before his time, the Atamal crystal. Through the enchanted relic, he received a horrific vision of the Eridar's future if they sided with Sargeras. They would become horribly disfigured, transformed into demonic beings of depthless evil. Velen warned his brothers of what he had seen, but they dismissed his insights and made it clear they intended to accept Sargeras's offer. Fearing that Archimond and Kil'jaeden would kill him if he continued to dissent, Velen feigned acceptance. Though he and Kil'jaeden were particularly close friends, Velen didn't believe he could trust their bond to prevail over Sargeras's enticing promises. Velen despaired at the fate of his people. In this moment of desperation, the same beings who had granted him his vision of the Eridar's downfall reached out to him. One of the Naru, Koure, contacted the Eridar leader and offered to shepherd him and his closest allies to safety. Filled with renewed hope, Velen sought out other Eridar whom he believed he could trust. As Sargeras arrived on Argus to corrupt the unsuspecting Eridar, Velen and his followers made their daring escape. They gathered aboard a massive Naru-dimensional fortress known as the Genidar and fled their homeworld forever. From that day forward, Velen and his followers would be known as the Draenei, or Exiled Ones. On Argus, Sargeras bent the other Eridar to his unholy will. Fanatical fell whisperings surged through the minds of the world's inhabitants, drowning out their ability to reason. Sargeras also infused the Eridar with fell energies, twisting their forms to resemble hideous demons. Sargeras found quick use for his new fell-corrupted converts. The Eridar settled in as commanders within the Burning Legion. Kil'jaeden and Archimonde would stand as the most gifted and powerful among them. Sargeras molded Kil'jaeden's innate cunning and intellect to suit the Legion's designs. Known thereafter as the Deceiver, Kil'jaeden was charged with using his wits to beguile the mortal civilizations of the physical universe and transform them into agents of the Burning Legion. Sargeras also saw Archimonde's talent in motivating his people as an invaluable tool to strengthen the Burning Crusade. Archimonde, henceforth known as the Defiler, would use his powerful will to drive the demonic masses to acts of extreme violence and barbarism. He would draw out and temper the furious strength in all those who served under him, remaking them into weapons of annihilation. Under the Eridar's leadership, the ranks of the Burning Legion swelled with new demonic races, gathered from the twisting nether and the worlds of the Great Dark. Archimonde empowered the monstrous pit lords and conscripted them to serve as living siege engines. They would inspire dread in all those they faced. The Moarg, a highly resourceful and industrious race of demons, became the Legion's armorers. They would forge fell-infused weaponry and constructs to besiege the worlds of the cosmos. Kil'jaeden also brought in the devious succubi to infiltrate prospective worlds for conquest and gather intelligence about their civilizations. The brutal Doomguard, demon warriors of unsurpassed strength and cruelty, fought as the Legion's shock troops. The zealous Shivara became the Legion's foremost mystics and advisors. They fostered a fanatical loyalty to Sargeras. These wicked creatures, among many others, bolstered the might of the Burning Legion. Pleased with his burgeoning forces, Sargeras launched the demons into the Great Dark, renewing his burning crusade against creation. In the ages to come, the Legion would scour countless other worlds and civilizations from existence. Flight of the Draenei, Velen's rejection of Sargeras's grand vision, and his subsequent escape enraged Kil'jaeden. Even though the Draenei had vanished without a trace, the Deceiver vowed never to stop hunting them, bent on vengeance for what he saw as Velen's betrayal. Loken's betrayal. Meanwhile, unbeknownst to Sargeras, the last embers of the Pantheon's power clung to life. Although Sargeras had destroyed the Titan's physical forms, Norganon's grand spellwork had preserved their souls. The disembodied Titan spirits hurtled through the great dark toward the world of Azeroth and its keepers. There, the Pantheon hoped they could locate physical forms to inhabit. If they could not find such vessels, the Titans feared their weakened spirits would soon fade into oblivion. Upon reaching Azeroth, the depleted spirits slammed into the keepers, who had been crafted by the Pantheon's own hands. The keepers were immediately overwhelmed as the Titans' powers flared in their minds. They witnessed fragmented memories of distant worlds, of lifetimes never lived and wonders never seen. But just as quickly as the influx of power had come, it dimmed. The keepers, still retaining their original personalities, puzzled over the strange phenomenon. They knew they had been gifted with a portion of the Pantheon's power, but they were unaware that the last remnants of their beloved makers had been infused in their very bodies. The bewildered servants called out to the Pantheon for answers, but they received no reply. The deep silence troubled the keepers, and they sank into a long period of confusion and unease. The old god Yogg-Saron, imprisoned beneath Ulduar, sensed these fluctuating emotions. In the eons since the ordering of Azeroth, a sharp awareness had begun to stir within the entity. Yogg-Saron had devised a plan to weaken its jailers and escape imprisonment. It would corrupt the Forge of Wills, tainting its creation matrix with a strange malady known as the Curse of Flesh. Any Titan forged created by the machine thereafter would fall victim to this affliction. Some would even spread it to previous generations of Titan forged. The Curse of Flesh would gradually transform many of these infected servants into mortal beings of flesh and blood beings, who the cunning old god knew could be easily killed. To implement this plan, Yogg-Saron turned to Keeper Loken. Out of Ulduar's guardians, Loken had been the most troubled by the Pantheon's silence. Yogg-Saron assailed the Keeper through fevered dreams, stoking the cold fires of his despair. Yet even in his disturbed state, Loken resisted the whisperings in his mind. Ultimately, his downfall would come from a much subtler place. As Loken drifted deeper and deeper into despair, he sought comfort from a Vrykul named Sif, the mate of his brother, Keeper Thorim. Loken often met with Sif in private, telling her of his darkest fears. In time, a forbidden love blossomed between the two Titan forged. Yogg-Saron latched onto Loken's love for Sif and twisted it into a dangerous obsession. The relationship quickly soured due to Loken's increasingly compulsive behavior. More and more, he talked of openly professing their love for each other, an act that Sif vehemently opposed. She knew that if Thorim discovered the affair, it would shatter the Keeper's unity. Ultimately, she broke all ties with Loken, demanding that he leave her in peace. The thought of losing Sif drove Loken to madness. In a fit of anger and jealousy, he lashed out at his love and killed her. Though racked by guilt, he could not bring himself to tell Thorim of what he had done. Loken scrambled for a way to cover up Sif's death. It was in this time of need that her spirit appeared before his eyes. Much to Loken's surprise, this visage of Sif forgave him. She also warned him of the need to act with haste, lest Thorim learn the truth. If he did, the Titan Forged would descend into civil war, and every pledge Loken had made to the Pantheon would be broken. Sif's suggestion struck Loken as devious, a characteristic he had never known her to possess. He sensed something strange in her spirit, an unseen darkness, subtle yet discernible. But Loken's fear clouded his judgment, and he pushed away his doubts. On Sif's guidance, Loken dragged her corpse into the frigid wastes of the storm peaks. He informed Thorim of his wife's demise, and convinced the keeper that Arngrim, king of the ice giants, was to blame. The grief-stricken Thorim unleashed his unbridled fury, slaying Arngrim and many of his followers. This event ignited a catastrophic war between Thorim's storm giants and Arngrim's ice giants. Sif's spirit continued aiding Loken as the conflict raged. Her guidance became ever more extreme and worrisome, but Loken forged ahead nonetheless. She convinced him to build an army of his own using the Forge of Wills, one large enough to protect Ulduar from the depredations of the warring giants. Loken was even persuaded to punish his brother for starting the war. He berated Thorim for letting anger rule his emotions, and for creating such a terrible rift between the Titan Forged. Loken further admonished his brother, claiming that Sif herself would look upon him in shame if she could only see the things he had done in her name. This bitter condemnation threw Thorim into a deep depression. Overcome with regret, he abandoned Ulduar and languished in solitude. With Thorim in isolation, Loken used his newly forged army to overwhelm the giants and end their conflict. All those who resisted his will were locked away in stasis chambers. But as these battles progressed, Loken noticed something unsettling among his warriors. A dark affliction suffused their spirits. Loken called out to Sif again for advice, but this time she remained silent. Dread overtook the keeper as he realized that her spirit had not existed at all. She was an illusion created by Yogg-Saron. Though Loken did not know it, the false spirit of Sif had also tainted the Forge of Wills, while the keeper was creating his army. Yogg-Saron's curse of flesh had taken root in the heart of the machine's creation matrix. Loken had, in his selfishness, allowed Yogg-Saron to play him as an unwitting pawn. This discovery shattered the last vestiges of Loken's noble heart. He became obsessed with keeping his transgressions a secret, even if it meant embracing the power of Yogg-Saron. With such might at his command, he knew he could defeat the remaining keepers and destroy all evidence of his wrongdoing. The sealing of the halls of valor. In order to defeat the other keepers, Loken realized that he would first have to neutralize Odin and his mighty Valyar army. But a direct attack against their floating citadel, the halls of valor, would be impossible. Instead, Loken took a more insidious approach. He reached out to Odin's adopted daughter, the Valkyr Helya. For millennia, Helya had dutifully followed Odin's commands, transporting the spirits of slain Vrykul to the halls of valor. Yet, even while she did so, Helya nursed the cold anger that stirred in her phantom heart. She never forgave Odin for turning her into a Valkyr against her will. Helya dreamed of a day when she might avenge what had been done to her and the others who had been transformed into Valkyr. Loken called out to Helya and played on her simmering anger and feelings of betrayal. He promised he would break the chains of servitude that bound her to follow Odin's will. In exchange, she would seal off the halls of valor from the world forever. Thereafter, Helya could usurp Odin's role as the caretaker of all Vrykul spirits. Enticed by this chance to sate her appetite for revenge, she agreed to Loken's plans. After Loken had restored her free will, Helya called on the same powers she had used to secure the elemental plane in ages past. She bent the latent arcane energies swirling around Azeroth to her command, sealing off the halls of valor and the inhabitants within. Odin and his mighty Valoryar struggled desperately to escape their floating citadel, but they could not break the impregnable barrier Helya had created. There the Valoryar and the Keeper would remain, trapped within the golden corridors of the halls of valor for ages to come. Helya, now liberated from her life of servitude, forged a new home for herself and the other Valkyr. She created this enchanted refuge far below the halls of valor, binding it to Azeroth's great seas. The ocean mists soon coiled up to envelop Helya's domain and shroud it from sight. Known as Helheim, this realm would become the final destination for many Vrykul spirits after death. Yet the darkness that had long festered in Helya's heart transformed Helheim into a place of nightmare and shadow. The souls of dead Vrykul who arrived there soon found themselves turned into vengeful wraith-like beings. These cursed spirits were known as the Kavaldir. They became one with the ocean mists, bound to the ebb and flow of the tides. The eternal fire of malice and anguish that burned in their souls would drive the Kavaldir to raid and plunder the shores of Kalimdor for all eternity. Guardians of shadow, not all Valkyr continued to follow Helya after Odin's defeat. Some of these spectral beings disappeared into the Shadowlands. The few who still retained a glimmer of nobility in their souls dedicated themselves to watching over the physical world. From within the Shadowlands, these Valkyr would at times guide the dead back to the land of the living. The fall of the Keepers, with Odin and his Valoryar sealed away, Loken returned to Ulduar. He believed he now had ample time to orchestrate the downfall of the other Keepers. Yet he soon discovered a new threat to his plans. Mimiron had begun investigating strange anomalies in Loken's new Titan Forged. The brilliant Keeper suspected that some malfunction within the Forge of Wills was to blame for the impurities he had observed. Before he could pursue his theory, Loken sabotaged the Keeper's workshop, killing Mimiron in what appeared to be a tragic accident. Mimiron, however, was not completely dead. Mimiron's faithful mechanomes discovered that their master's spirit lived on. They scrambled to build a giant mechanized body to house the keeper's fatting soul. This heroic act saved Mimiron, but he was never the same again. His brush with death had broken his mind. He secluded himself in Ulduar's vast workshops, spending his days lost in the inner workings of his clockwork inventions. Knowing Mimiron's fate would raise suspicions among the other keepers, Loken dispatched his army to neutralize his remaining brethren. First, Loken confronted Freya at her verdant domain within the Storm Peaks, the Temple of Life. Battle raged between the two keepers and their followers, sundering the temple and bleeding its precious life energies dry. Freya struggled valiantly against her foes, but she ultimately fell to Loken and the shadowy powers Yogg-Saron had granted him. Yogg-Saron itself seized on Freya's weakened state, enthralling her spirit. The old god compelled the broken Freya to withdraw into the halls of Ulduar. There, she would spend her forlorn days tending to a sprawling garden at the heart of the fortress. As Loken confronted Freya, another group of his Titan-forged waged war on the mighty keeper Hodir within his lair, the Temple of Winter. Two fire giants named Ignis and Volcon led the assault. They enveloped the temple in blistering infernos, sapping Hodir's wintry strength and decimating his icy followers. Loken later arrived to subdue Hodir directly, a task he completed with ease. Just as it had done with Freya, Yogg-Saron warped Hodir's mind. The entity forced the keeper to retreat into a frigid chamber within Ulduar, where he would remain in seclusion for millennia. Two of the remaining keepers, Tyr and Arcadas, did not fall victim to Loken's schemes. Tyr had long suspected that a darkness was growing within the fallen keeper, a suspicion that was confirmed when he witnessed Loken's attack on Hodir. Yet Tyr was in no position to confront Loken directly. Throngs of the fallen keeper's loyal, Titan-forged, stalked the Storm Peaks and the halls of Ulduar. Knowing he stood little chance against this army, Tyr took Arcadas and their close friend, a Titan-forged giantess named Ironaya, to the outskirts of the Storm Peaks. Among the icy cliffs, they waited and watched Loken's schemes unfold, planning their next move. Loken dispatched his forces to hunt down Tyr and his companions. These Titan-forged scoured the mountains and caves of the Storm Peaks, but they never found their prey. Believing that Tyr and his allies had fled the region, Loken asserted sole dominion over Ulduar. He altered the machineries within the fortress and used them to anoint himself the new prime designate of Azeroth. He also disabled the tainted Forge of Wills and banished many of his servants to the Storm Peaks. Thereafter, he sealed off the sprawling fortress of Ulduar. Loken languished in regret within Ulduar's silent halls. Despite everything he had accomplished, he was ever fearful that the Pantheon, or their appointed watcher, Algalon, would one day return to Azeroth. If that happened, they would discover Loken's horrific crimes and punish him. But in truth, the greatest threat was right beneath Loken's feet. No longer under the watchful eyes of Ulduar's jailers, Yogg-Saron began to stir, working to free itself from its impregnable prison. The vanishing of Ra, as he dealt with the other keepers, Loken always expected that Ra would emerge from the southern reaches of Kalimdor to investigate the goings-on in Ulduar. But much to Loken's surprise, the Highkeeper remained silent throughout these world-altering events. Overcome with curiosity, Loken dispatched a contingent of his army to the distant bastion of Uldum to investigate Ra's activities. These Titan-forged agents never found the missing Highkeeper, but they did learn from the local Gu, Tolvir, and Anubiseths that Ra had mysteriously vanished. These meetings would have a lasting impact. In journeying south, Loken's forces had unwittingly spread the curse of flesh throughout many of Ra's faithful servants. Unbeknownst to Loken and the Titan Forged, Ra had experienced a revelation, one so terrible that it had driven him into seclusion. When the Pantheon's power and memories had been infused in the Keepers, Ra had reeled in confusion, much like his siblings. Over time, however, he had concluded that this event was more than just an anomaly. The influx of power was the last remnant of the Pantheon's spirits. Ra struggled to accept the fact that the Pantheon had fallen. He extracted the lingering power of Amenthul from himself and carefully stored it in a mountain vault near what would become known as the Vale of Eternal Blossoms. There, the Highkeeper hoped to preserve what little was left of his beloved Titan creator. Ra then retreated into the catacombs beneath the land to meditate on what he had learned. With the Highkeeper gone, his loyal Titan Forged developed new cultures, wholly distinct from those of their northern kin. Most of the Tolvir congregated around Uldum, making the fortress their home. To the west, the Anubiseths continued their sacred charge of watching over the prison of Cthulhu. Similarly, the Gu remained in the east, guarding the Titan-forged vaults and machineries buried beneath the earth. The Winterscorn War. For many ages after Loken's betrayal, the Titan-forged who were exiled from Ulduar spread across northern Kalimdor. The lumbering giants gradually trickled into the mountains and seas around the region, disappearing from sight. The Earthen tunneled into the deep places of the world, where they fought for dominance against a race of brutish and misshapen creatures known as Trogs. Many of the Vrykul remained above ground, congregating into small clans. Some of these factions wandered the harsh northern landscape as nomads. Others established dwellings across the forested tundra of the region. A tenuous peace existed between these groups of Titan-forged, but it could not last. In time, malign forces moved to assert dominion over the lands once protected by the Keepers. Among these forces were two of Loken's own creations, the brutish fire giants Volkan and Ignis. Volkan and Ignis saw the storm peaks surrounding Ulduar as a land ripe for conquest. Yet, to seize the region, they required an army. To this end, the giants turned to the fierce Winterscorn clan of Vrykul. Though many Vrykul were warlike in nature, most avoided direct confrontation with each other. The Winterscorn proved to be an exception. These Vrykul had developed a culture of violence and aggression, due in large part to their belief that they would one day ascend to the halls of valor. They thrived on conflict, whether it was between members of their own clan or with nearby groups of Titanforged. Volkan and Ignis took control of the Winterscorn by force and stoked the fires of their battle lust. The giants fortified the metal hides of the Vrykul with enchanted armor. Volkan and Ignis also forged powerful weapons designed to shatter the iron and stone skin of the other Titanforged. But just as this new army embarked on its great conquest, anomalies began to appear in the Winterscorn. The Vrykul's metallic skin became brittle and weak. They had begun showing the first symptoms of the curse of flesh. Despite this setback, Volkan and Ignis had no intentions of abandoning their campaign. They also knew that they could no longer rely on the Winterscorn alone to achieve victory. To strengthen the army, Volkan and Ignis molded powerful molten golems and iron constructs of their own design. This massive Winterscorn army marched first against the good-natured Earthen, storming their underground lairs. The Earthen were utterly unprepared to face such an overwhelming and organized force. Entire caverns were massacred to the last living creature. A small group of survivors escaped the onslaught and sought the help of Tyr, Arcadas, and Ironaya, who had thus far eluded Loken's wrath. Incensed by what they learned, Tyr and his companions immediately journeyed to the Earthen's cavernous home to aid the beleaguered Titanforged. Tyr himself led the bravest of the Earthen in skirmishes with the Winterscorn, while Arcadas and Ironaya constructed defenses to ward off future attacks. In time, the Earthen and their allies drove back the Winterscorn. Although their attempt to conquer the storm peaks had failed, Volkan and Ignis did not concede defeat. They returned to their blistering forges and created a new army, one even greater than before. Not satisfied with golems and constructs alone, Volkan and Ignis crafted enchanted snares with which to enslave entire flights of proto-dragons. These creatures would serve not as mounts, but as beasts of war. The giants outfitted their winged servants with fiery weapons to strike terror into the hearts of the Earthen. The Winterscorn's next brutal assault shattered the Earthen's defenses and drove them from their refuge. The Earthens scattered across the icy mountain passes, but they could not escape their foes. Vrykul and golems hunted the Earthen on the ground, while proto-dragons assailed them from the skies. Even Tyr, Arcadas, and Ironaya were forced to flee from the Winterscorn's fury. Knowing that he and his allies could not defeat the Winterscorn alone, Tyr called on the 5 dragon aspects for help. The noble aspects grew enraged upon seeing so many dead Titanforged. Their fury only deepened when they learned that proto-dragons had been enslaved. Without hesitation, the aspects took wing and unleashed their powers on the Winterscorn's iron ranks. Much as they had done in their fight against Galacrond, the aspects worked in unison to overwhelm the Vrykul army. Alexstrasza held the Winterscorn at bay with towering walls of enchanted fire. Malygos drained the magical essence that fueled the constructs and golems, rendering them useless. He also shattered the enchanted snares that bound the proto-dragons and set the beasts free. Neltharion raised mountains from the earth to corral and contain the Vrykul and their giant masters. Lastly, Ysera and Nozdormu combined their powers to create a spell that would bring a decisive end to the conflict. Ysera and Nozdormu enveloped the Winterscorn in a cloying mist that caused the Titan Forged to fall asleep. These incapacitated creatures were then locked away in tomb cities across northern Kalimdor. They would not know the peaceful sleep of the Emerald Dream. Rather, they would languish in a timeless, unconscious slumber for thousands upon thousands of years. In the millennia to come, the curse of flesh would continue warping the sleeping Winterscorn Vrykul. When they eventually awoke, almost every one of them would discover that they had degenerated into mortal creatures of flesh and blood, Trogs and the origins of Uldaman. Following the war with the old gods, the Keepers used the Forge of Wills to create new Titan Forged to help them reshape the world. Yet, their first designs proved too complex and overambitious. Rather than making the perfect servants, they had created stone-skinned savages known as Trogs. The Keepers quickly refined and perfected their designs. The next generation of Titan Forged to emerge from the Forge of Wills would be known as the Earthen. The Keepers were troubled by the Trogs, but they could not bear to destroy them. Instead, Ironaya built a small subterranean vault, known as Uldaman, that would act as a stasis chamber for the Trogs. Some of them escaped imprisonment and wandered the newly ordered world. Others even found their way into the domain of Earth in the elemental plane, Deep Home. The discs of Norganon. With the Winterscorn defeated, Keeper Tyr at long last turned his attention to Loken. So long as Ulduar remained sealed off and the Titan Forged were divided, more conflicts would arise. Tyr grimly concluded that unless he took action against Loken, Azeroth would spiral into an abyss of war and chaos. But overthrowing Loken would require years of preparation. Tyr and his allies, Arcadas and Ironaya, concluded that they would first need to gather intelligence on Loken and his activities. To this end, they formulated a plan to steal the discs of Norganon from the heart of Ulduar. The relics had been recording everything that transpired on Azeroth, including Loken's betrayal. If there was any hope of undoing the damage caused by his schemes, it would be through the careful study of his actions. Having devised a ruse to claim the discs, Tyr traveled to the gates of Ulduar itself. There, he called on Loken to relinquish control of Ulduar for the good of Azeroth, threatening dire consequences if he refused. Loken emerged from the fortress to convince Tyr that less drastic measures would suffice. A fierce argument erupted between the two keepers, exactly as Tyr had hoped. While Loken was distracted, Arcadas and Ironaya infiltrated Ulduar and stole the discs of Norganon. Once they had secured the artifacts, Tyr and his companions escaped back into the icy crags and ridges of the storm peaks. They knew that Loken would soon hunt them down. Thus, they prepared to journey south, where they hoped to find a refuge from which to plan their next move. Before setting out, Tyr and his allies gathered great numbers of Titan-forged who dwelled around Ulduar. A large group of peaceful Vrykul afflicted by the curse of flesh, most of the surviving earthen, and many of the mechanomes agreed to take part in the journey. Tyr, Arcadas, and Ironaya saw these Titan-forged as innocent victims of Loken's treachery, and they promised to secure them a sanctuary before liberating Ulduar. The refugees traveled for many weeks, believing they had eluded Loken. When Loken learned that the discs of Norganon were missing, panic seized him. If Tyr and his allies presented the artifacts to Algalon or the Pantheon, Loken's life would be forfeit. Out of desperation, he turned to the only creatures he knew were powerful enough to stop the mighty Tyr and recover the discs. Ancient Cuthraxi monstrosities known as Zakaj and Kithix. Zakaj and Kithix had served as the Black Empire's most ruthless and cunning Cuthraxi generals. Long ago, the keepers had sealed them and many of the other Naraki away in underground chambers alongside the old gods. With considerable effort, Loken excavated these Cuthraxi tombs and roused Zakaj and Kithix to life. He ordered the colossal abominations to kill Tyr and all who followed him. Sensing the lingering touch of Yogg-Saron in Loken's mind, the two Cuthraxi readily obeyed. Far to the south, in a tranquil and temperate glade, Zakaj and Kithix overtook the fleeing keepers and their followers. Fearing for his allies' lives, Tyr ordered Arcadas and Ironaya to lead the rest of the Titan-forged farther south. Meanwhile, he would hold off the Cuthraxi for as long as possible. Only the barest shadow of Agramar's old power lingered within Tyr's iron form. But the Titan's noble spirit had not flagged. Tyr would not retreat, not when the lives of innocents were at risk. As he grappled with the Cuthraxi, torrents of both arcane and shadow energy ripped through the once peaceful glade. The violent struggle between the lone keeper and the Cuthraxi raged for 6 days and nights. Through it all, Tyr never gave ground, but neither did his foes. As fatigue set in, Tyr resolved to sacrifice himself to protect his friends. He unleashed all of his remaining power on the Cuthraxi, expending his life force in a blinding explosion of arcane energy that shook the bones of the world. To the south, Arcadas and Ironaya watched as the eruption of magic flared across the horizon. After the volatile energies subsided, the two Titan-forged ventured back to the site of the battle. There, within a giant crater crackling with arcane magic, they found the lifeless bodies of Tyr and Zakaj. Despite facing hopeless odds, the Keeper of Justice, had nearly killed both Cuthraxi. The survivor, Kithix, had only narrowly escaped Tyr's vengeful onslaught. The severely wounded Cuthrax had blindly fled to the west. It would not be seen again for many thousands of years. In honor of her fallen comrade, Ironaya named the glade surrounding the crater Tyr's Fall, which in the Vrykul tongue translated to Tyr's Fall. She and her followers buried Tyr and his foe where they lay. They placed Tyr's massive silver hand atop his final resting place as a memorial to his valiant sacrifice. Although all of the refugees would carry on the story of Tyr's noble sacrifice, the Vrykul in particular felt compelled to do something more. They were so moved by the Keeper's deeds that they decided to settle at the battle site and stand vigil over Tyr's grave until the end of their days. Arcadus and Ironaya honored the Vrykul's wishes to settle the land of Tirisfal. The Keeper and the Giantess continued south with the Earthen and Mechanomes in tow. They eventually stopped at the easternmost Titan-forged vault on Kalimdor, Uldaman. Arcadus and Ironaya expanded the site, carving out new chambers to hold the discs of Norganon, and vowing to protect the history of Azeroth with their lives, if need be. As the years passed, some of the Earthen exhibited signs of the curse of flesh. Many of these Titan-forged feared that the effects would only worsen. They asked to be placed in hibernation until a cure could one day be found. Arcadus, promising to rouse them at some time in the future, agreed. He sealed his followers within Uldaman's vast subterranean vaults. The Mechanomes, however, remained awake. Even though they knew the curse would one day overtake them as well, they heroically vowed to watch over Uldaman and maintain its wondrous machineries. In distant Ulduar, Loken became desperate upon learning that his Cuthraxi had failed to kill his foes. He assumed that with the mighty Tyr dead, Arcadus and Ironaya would not attempt a direct assault upon Ulduar. But the discs of Norganon still posed a threat to him. Stealing or destroying the artifacts was no longer an option. Arcadus and Ironaya could easily seal off Uldaman from intruders. Instead, Loken attempted to replace the discs of Norganon with an archive of his own design, one that he dubbed the Tribunal of Ages. He adjusted the historical events contained in this new repository to his liking and expunged his sins from the record. Though he assumed he had been successful, his archive proved to be flawed. The histories stored within were warped even beyond Loken's understanding. Loken then took one final drastic measure to prevent retribution from Arcadus and Ironaya. He believed that his enemies would eventually summon the constellar Algalon. To stop this, Loken altered the Titan communication devices in Ulduar. This assured that no living creature would be able to contact Algalon. Only Loken's own death would draw the constellar to Azeroth. The fallen keeper assumed that his demise would come at the hands of Arcadus and Ironaya. If so, he was confident that Algalon would take his revenge for him by wiping out every living creature on Azeroth's surface. Tyr's sacrifice, the mortals who would one day inhabit the area of Tirisfal, would feel two conflicting energies emanating from the earth: the remaining spiritual essence of Keeper Tyr and that of his enemy Zakaj. Some would tap into Tyr's energy, others would become attuned to the Cuthrax's dark aura. Children of giants, the rise of humanity, with the Winterscorn asleep in their deep vaults, and many of the earthen sealed within Uldaman, the remaining Vrykul clans dominated the lands of northern Kalimdor. Over the course of eons, their disparate cultures flourished in unique ways. They developed their own identities and customs as they spread across the unforgiving north. One of the mightiest clans to arise was the Dragonflayer. Much like the Winterscorn, these Vrykul found that their iron hides were gradually turning to flesh over time. Initially, the clan leaders sought to balance out their diminishing strength by enslaving the ancient proto-dragons, just as the Winterscorn had done in previous centuries. But unlike the Winterscorn, the Dragonflayers did not see the proto-dragons as mere beasts of war. They used the fearsome drakes as hunting companions, and they also rode them as battle mounts. Over time, these proto-dragons became an inseparable part of the clan's culture. They were also a necessary weapon against the Vrykul's mortal enemy, a fierce race of bear men called the Jalgar, the progenitors of modern-day furbolgs. Under King Yumiron, the Dragonflayer clan finally gained the upper hand against its foes. In a coordinated offensive, the Vrykul attacked and drove the Jalgar into Kalimdor's lush central forests. Yet, on the heels of this victory, tragedy struck. The curse of flesh took another turn. Dragonflayer women began giving birth to small, malformed children, a development that spread fear and superstition among the clan. Some of the Vrykul even blamed Yumiron for the affliction, but the king had his own belief about who was responsible. In his mind, the mythical keepers were behind the curse of flesh, the keepers, whom many Vrykul viewed as their godlike creators, had not been seen or heard from in generations. Yumiron convinced his people to renounce the silent and aloof keepers, who had clearly abandoned them to the curse of flesh. He promised to unite all Vrykul under his banner. As his first decree, Yumiron ordered his followers to cleanse the clan by destroying all of the malformed infants. Many of the Dragonflayers obeyed Yumiron's brutal orders. Some, however, could not bring themselves to murder innocent children. They sought to hide their stunted offspring in a place of legend, a land far to the south, where a lost clan of Vrykul was said to have journeyed with Tyr, Arcadas, and Ironaya. A number of Dragonflayers ventured south, taking their diminutive newborns in search of this fairy tale refuge. Most were never heard from again, but others did find their way. With heavy hearts, they left their beloved sons and daughters in the care of the Vrykul, who inhabited Tirisfal. In the ages that followed, the afflicted children and their offspring would continue degenerating into mortal beings called humans. Many of the other Titan-forged mechanomes, Tolvir, Mogu, and giants would suffer a similar fate. Very few of the Keeper's servants would fight off the affliction. Just as Yogg-Saron had hoped, the curse of flesh would weaken the Titan-forged, but it would also give rise to mortal qualities of necessity that the old god had never anticipated: courage, resolve, and heroism, unaware that these potent traits would one day shape the fate of the world. Yogg-Saron and the other old gods focused on escaping their prisons. Freedom, however, would take thousands of years to attain. For now, more immediate dangers stirred in the lush heart of Kalimdor. A new power, a savage native race born in the early ages of the world, was on the rise. They called themselves trolls, and it would not be long before they learned of the malignant entities imprisoned beneath the earth: the dragonflayers and the long slumber. The dragonflayers struggled to purge themselves of the curse of flesh in many ways. Despite all of their efforts, they would remain addled and weakened by the affliction. Eventually, these Vrykul would place themselves in hibernation in the hopes of staving off the curse of flesh. Thank you for listening. I hope you enjoyed this audio journey into Azeroth, the world of Warcraft. In our next episode, we will begin Chapter 3, Ancient Kalimdor.